Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's the morning of Wednesday, the 1st of May, 2019. And the title of this morning's broadcast is, it's the beginning and quite possibly the end of Teresa May. But here I am this morning up on the edge of Dartmoor in the southwest of England, and the light is really quite strange here. In fact, I'm just going to see if it's being affected by my lens in any way, but it's overcast. Sea mist is coming in. I've got Haytor up behind me, but the beauty here is the peace, the quiet, and the bird song. And for those of you who have the misfortune to be watching this sitting inside a city, then the likelihood is that these are sounds that you're not hearing very often these days. And in fact, the disappearance of birdsong is such that most people don't even notice that it's not there anymore because they haven't heard it in such a long time. But, that's one of the reasons I actually adore being outside, being out in the country, and being away from the urban areas, because I get that opportunity to embrace the natural world, which is rapidly disappearing, sadly, but that's down to the rampant corporatization of the environment. And of course, the latest assault is on 5G. And tomorrow, of course, much of the country goes to the polls. In fact, it's really quite significant. There's some 8,000 odd council seats up for grabs tomorrow. There's 163 Tory councils and 74 Labour councils. And, what is going to be really interesting is to see how Middle England votes, because those people who are not motivated to participate in the electoral process, of course, they won't tomorrow. There's no reason for them to perhaps, change the habits of their conviction. So this is Middle England. This is people who basically just want to get on with their daily lives and be able to live life without being assaulted by rampant corporatism, by surveillance cameras, or of course physically assaulted. So Middle England is tomorrow going to give an insight into its current holding of the political system in this country. And of course, the reality is that the Tory party and the Labour Party have demonstrated categorically that they don't give a flying frack for the democratic process. The main parties are purely there for their own gain, to hang on to that grip of power. And never has it been more apparent than basically they're giving the finger to the electorate by what's occurred over Brexit. Because the Tories sought the mandate, they got the mandate, and then they put in someone who they knew couldn't deliver, even if she wanted to, because she does not have the intellectual capacity. She has demonstrated through her entire political career that she is prepared to do whatever it is that her paymasters tell her to do. And of course, the classic of that is when she was Home Secretary and she conveniently disappeared all of the evidence that pointed towards senior government officials being involved in paedophilia. So they knew she was a safe pair of hands. They knew that she wasn't going to rock the boat by pushing for a political outcome that the establishment didn't want. So they just keep kicking the can down the road. So they walk this tightrope of keeping the country working, keeping the people doing what they need them to do but at the same time completely dismissing the will of the people in terms of getting out of the EU. And of course, they're seeking to, of course, make it nigh on impossible to come out of the EU with military unification. And, full credit to UK Column, to Brian Gerrish, Mike Robinson, and David Ellis in particular, who have been trying to flag up this issue, particularly amongst parliamentarians, for best part of probably 5-6 years now at least. And now one or two MPs are starting to latch on, but of course as soon as they do, then it would seem that they come under attack from not just the party whip, but anybody that the party whip can bring down to bear on them. So Labour, well, of course Jeremy Corbyn had the world at his feet, basically, or certainly the country. All he had to do was hold to his conviction, which was to acknowledge the will of the people through the referendum and reject the minority calls in his party, but majority amongst his MPs, because they're on the gravy train, for a second referendum. So despite originally stating that the initial referendum needed to be respected and the will of the people should be upheld, he's now kowtowed and said, well, yes, there needs to be a confirmatory people's vote. Well, this is the first opportunity that people across the country have really had to show their displeasure since the debacle of the parliamentary attitude towards Brexit. So let's see what happens. Of course, it's a great time perhaps for independent candidates, but only, of course, if they are well known within the constituencies, the wards where they are standing. So by the time we come back here on Friday morning, wherever we happen to be, and hopefully we're going to be able to report that both Tories and Labour have been absolutely drubbed at the local council elections, and we're seeing something emerge which perhaps we haven't seen in a long time, and that is the rise of the independent councillor. And then of course the challenge is going to be to try and ensure that these independent councillors have the fortitude to resist the lobbying pressures that will inevitably be brought to bear by both the government and the corporations. So the other issue, of course, the massive issue that every authority around the country needs to be picking up on, and of course that is 5G. And I came across a piece of information yesterday which gave me some hope, and that is that the UK is actually one of the industrialized countries that is least reliant on wireless for its connectivity. In fact, the top of the league is Canada, and of course no real surprise with the size of the country, but Canada has a 24% reliance on wireless technology. USA 19%, Russia 16%, Spain 15%, France 9%, but the UK just 5%, which shows that we have a wired infrastructure that wouldn't take too much more to ensure that every residence and every place of work and every place of education is hardwired. But the reality is that the globalists are desperate to push out 5G because they need their full spectrum dominance. And this can only be brought about with the advent of the Internet of Things, where everything is microchipped and everything is traceable. Some of the major clothing stores already embed microchips within their clothing. They claim for the purpose of stock control, and I'm sure that's all it is used for currently. But with the advent of 5G, they will literally be able to track where that item of clothing goes once it's left the store. So if you've paid by credit card, then of course your name will be very much linked to that item of clothing, and the 5G network will literally be able to pick up as you walk down the street that there goes Ian Crane wearing clothes that he's bought from various stores around the community. And you say, well, but why would anyone want that information? Well, it's not anyone, it's the artificial intelligence. And of course the great unknown is how that artificial intelligence will be used. Although people may say, yeah, but it'll only be used as we program. But as Facebook learnt a couple of years ago, when they were installing their bots to create fake profiles, they actually had to shut it down because they discovered that these bots were actually communicating with each other in a language that they were actually generating as they were communicating. So, this is with the low level of artificial intelligence that is in place right now. Just imagine the sci-fi nightmare if that actually gets a grip, because it will be the invisible enemy. And I know that's been the subject of some sci-fi scripts and movies over the past. But, was that just conditioning? Were people being prepared for this rush towards artificial intelligence? And of course, the other knock-on effect of AI and the advent of automation, and this is the aspect of the fourth industrial revolution that no one's really talking about right now, and that is the loss of employment. And it is acknowledged that something perhaps in the region of 60 to 70% of jobs around the year 2050 don't actually exist today. That's the degree of change that is coming. Now, I'm all for embracing change. I'm certainly no Luddite, but that change has to be beneficial. It has to be beneficial to the wider community, and of course we have to avoid the continual rape and pillage of the environment. And this is why I think that the focus on climate change is potentially our major Achilles heel, because people are being asked not to concentrate on what's occurring at a component level, but to focus on this ethereal climate change. And in fact, I was reading a report by one of the Labour MPs who'd met with the Extinction Rebellion representatives, but of course they have no leaders. I'm not sure how that works. But anyway, she was basically telling them that their call for a single child policy, a la that which China applied some years ago, would just not be appropriate. That's not the way government works. But it's very clear that perhaps their concern may be misguided, but it's actually something that people really should start to take some stock of. That over the coming years, there certainly isn't going to be anything like the opportunity of employment that we've had in the past. Now, Rudolf Steiner 100 years ago made the observation that with the advent of automation, then it would provide the opportunities for people to enjoy their family and leisure time, and that nobody should have to work more than 4 hours a day. Well, that would, of course, be exactly the case in an environment where capitalism had a conscience. Because if that was the case, then these CEOs who are taking outrageous salary and compensation packages from their companies would be putting that back into the community. I mean, imagine a situation where corporations said, you know what, yes, we're going to take care of shareholders, but only to a basic degree. Yes, we are going to obviously continue to hold funds to reinvest, but we are going to try to push as much back down to those who help to make that profit, i.e. the employees. And if we have an opportunity to pay people a little bit more and give them the opportunity to work a few hours less, then we will have made a very significant contribution to that community. But any CEO or CFO who put that recommendation to their board would, of course, be run off in a heartbeat, because today the only criteria for operating at a senior level in our corporate world is greed. You have to be motivated by greed. And every action, every thought, every decision that you make has to be based upon shareholder value, which is a euphemism for greed. So, we have some fundamental issues to address here. There's absolutely no question that, to continue along this current trajectory is not going to be a viable proposition, and it's certainly not going to be conducive with future generations being able to, enjoy the environment that we've had the luxury to enjoy during our lives. And, whilst it is our generation that, has unfortunately embraced the greed is good philosophy as presented by, the Reagan-Thatcher Greenspan philosophy of the 1980s. And, while we've been doing that and sort of taken our eye off of what's going on around us, then obviously we've created a massive problem, which, the younger generation are basically being told that the problem is population. And, if anyone thinks for one moment that there's an element amongst the green climate movement who wouldn't advocate some kind of population culling, then you're not paying attention. And, this may not be discussed quite as openly as perhaps it should, but the evidence is all around us. And of course, a massive part of that is how diseases and illnesses such as cancer, which can be treated very, very effectively, continue not to be, because it is seen as a way of culling those who can no longer make a direct contribution to the corporatocracy. So, it really is a time to sit down and maybe think about how we work through this, because, the agenda of the far left is totally unacceptable. The agenda of the far right is totally unacceptable. There's always going to be people who will have those opinions, but, that's the nature of the beast. And, we certainly listen to their concerns, because somewhere in amongst their extremism may be some gems that actually need to be adopted and move forward. But the reality is that, we need to be looking at the majority. We need to be looking at the way in which our communities function, the way in which our communities can not only enjoy the environment, but also enjoy their lives, without the fear, the constant fear and the constant stress that is put on them as a result of this rampant corporatism. And, the reality is that the vast majority of people in the developed world who we think we're so well off, but the vast majority are maybe just 2 or 3 salary checks at the most away from homelessness. And that, of course, is part of the control mechanism. So there's an opportunity tomorrow to vote. And if you feel that you really do not want to put your mark on any of the boxes on the voting paper, then do write none of the above. Do let the establishment know that basically you cannot see how any of those named candidates can actually make any real contribution to what's unfolding. So, that is still a participation. But, the reality is that ultimately we do get the leadership that we deserve. I'll use that term loosely. And part of that is through not actually participating in the electoral process. And the mainstream parties, the Labour Party, the Tory Party, are extremely grateful for those people who don't vote, because they know that they wouldn't be voting for them. They'd be voting for an independent or one of the fringe parties. So if you can bring yourself to vote, think very carefully about how you're going to use that vote, not just to send a message to the establishment, but also to benefit your community. Now, tomorrow I shall be hopefully in the studio, and I shall hopefully be recording an interview with David Noakes and with Lynn Tyre. Now, that interview will be broadcast later on Thursday at 7:30, which is the usual time for an episode of Humanity versus Insanity. And the reason we can't do it live, of course, is because David is under curfew and has to be back at his designated residence by 7 p.m. But this will be the first opportunity that David and Lynn have had to speak about their experience. And of course, David speaking about his not particularly pleasant experience in Wandsworth prison over the past, was it nearly 5 months or so now. So join me tomorrow evening at 7:30 for Humanity versus Insanity. And then I'll be back with you on Friday morning when we'll hopefully be reporting that the Tory and the Labour Party have taken a massive drubbing in the council elections around the country, around England and Northern Ireland. So you have a great day, and I will catch with you again on Friday morning. You take care now.